Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the professor, and this is the moment of truth.
Ben, my question for you would be, we've seen this civil war play out recently in the Democratic Party between the progressive wing of the party and the centrist wing of the party. It didn't seem to have played out that much during these races in Wisconsin over this cycle. If Wisconsin is to be replicated around the country for Democrats, how important is it that other states replicate what you did in a sense of the left not getting involved in these special elections?
Now, family, I want you to take a look at what this woman said. Look at the wording that she used. Now, the first thing that needs to be known is the white media has been very skillfully using weasel words to try to redefine the entire political discourse in America. The Democrats have drifted way far to the right. Truth be told, the country has always been right of center, especially when it comes to black people. So when she sits here talking about the centrist, she's talking about people who everywhere else in the world would be classified as hard right-wingers. That's what the Democrats are. Now, I've taken Chris Hedges to task because this guy happens to be an empty-headed undercover racist. Literally, the one and only intelligent utterance that this man has had in 4 decades is something that was obvious when he said that Bill Clinton had pushed the Democrats so far to the right that they had become the Republicans, and this in turn pushed the Republicans so far to the right that they became insane. So it is an utter and complete lie that the Democrats have some sort of centrist. Nancy Pelosi is not a centrist. Barack Obama was not a centrist. Chuck Schumer is not a centrist. When these clowns sit there and lie through their teeth to float billions of dollars to the thugs in blue, requiring absolutely no supervision, no reform of any sort, no punishment, no strings attached, that's exactly what you get from a Republican. How the hell is this a centrist? They're defining centrist as whatever is in the interest of established power. That is not centrist at all. That's far right. In America, you basically only have the right, the far right, and the oh my God, we fell off a cliff right. But that's how she started off, because anybody who actually studies communications will tell you that is a key component of setting up a false premise. You have to define, or rather redefine, the literal terms of the debate. Go ahead and redefine the words. That way, before any sort of discussion or debate even begins, you've already slanted things in your favor. That's what you see them trying to do. They're trying to redefine the words. You got to get in there from the very beginning and start off with the idea of, oh, well, these people over here, the ones who are kissing the right wings behinds, these people are the centrists. And these people over here, the ones who are demanding changes, they're far left. They're far left. These guys are the fringe. They're the nutbags. You can't be listening to them. And if all of this sounds familiar, it should. It's exactly what Chris Rufo and other propagandists for the extreme right do. He went on Twitter bragging that he was going to redefine critical race theory so he could invent a new definition of it. One that, as he put it, would encapsulate all of the things that are unpopular with American society. Any unpopular position there is, that's what he would say is critical race theory. At least in his case, he was honest about his lies. He said that he wanted to make sure that people would read something crazy in the newspaper and associate that with critical race theory. That's part of how you do that, creating a false association in people's minds. That's what it's called. If you've ever taken a communications course, you know that's the phrase, creating a false association. How do you do it? You take two completely unrelated things and you mention them in the same sentence as if they were related. Like how George W. Bush did with 9/11 and Saddam, 9/11, 9/11, Iraq, Al-Qaeda. You do that enough times, you've created a false association. People will sit there and think that the two have something to do with each other when they don't. Before you even get into the discussion, you're already defining people in the center. Well, these guys are in the middle, and these guys are very much centrist. They're very much balanced. These guys are not too extreme either way, when the truth of the matter is these guys are the far right. Nancy Pelosi and her ilk, they are the far right. Look what they do whenever black people make even the most modest of demands. They make it very clear that they would much rather be out of power than to actually do what their voters say. That's extreme. Those are the extremists. But they also represent the same position as the white corporate masters of MSNBC and the rest of the white media. So, hey, no. These guys, we got to say that they're the centrists. The only differences between the Democrats and the Republicans now are purely rhetorical differences. And that's what the white media and the white left tries to play up. Well, yeah, at least the Democrats, they don't use racial slurs. When you look at how these guys carry out policy, that becomes a distinction without a difference. This morning's briefing is about resisting mind control. You'll have a lot of staged political performances being put on where they sit around in a circle and ask questions that are not really questions at all. They're just a setup for the person answering to go ahead and validate whatever the media wants you to think. You have the trash at MSNBC and Morning Joe trying to hold the line for the accommodationist white left. They're trying to control what people think, especially what they think about the people who are making demands. They don't want anyone thinking that the people to the left of Nancy Pelosi can win an election because this is about preserving the status quo. But they can only do that if they condition people to believe their lies. Democrats lose elections because they refuse to stand by their base and refuse to stand up for what most of the 20th century had become the party's political platform. They were the ones who put things like Glass-Steagall in place. And then it was a Democrat, Bill Clinton, who repealed it in the 1990s, on his way out the door, by the way. Democrats made the willful, intentional decision that they were going to sell out to corporate interests so that they could finally get some of that sweet, big donor cash like the Republicans had always been getting. As a result, the Democrats' base has become completely demoralized and started staying home. And even the Democrats who are running these political campaigns understand this, that the problem is that the Democrats have been doing everything that they can to try to be Republican light, and that doesn't work.
I don't think that the most meaningful distinction within Democrats now is left versus center. I think it's actually going on your front foot and fighting back versus rolling over and playing dead.
Yeah, you could tell that she didn't like the sound of that. What she was expecting was he was supposed to validate, we're not doing anything with these people. We're making any sort of demands. This guy, he's actually trying to strike something of a balanced tone. But that's what you see the white media trying to do. They're trying to validate the idea that, the Democrats had a great night in Wisconsin, and that's because they kept all of these people on the far left, all those niggers making demands. They kept them at arm's length. Never mind the fact that you didn't have any of the quote-unquote far left who were making any demands or trying to get involved in the race at all. They're trying to take credit for something that the Democrats didn't actually do, but the people at home don't know that. This is all about trying to misshape public perception through false narratives. I've already explained why the Democrats and the white media's attacks on defund the police are bogus. Democrats were swept to victory on a tidal wave of voters in 2020 when cities were burning and the police were literally under siege. This is a massive propaganda effort to trick people into thinking that none of that happened. What we're seeing is basically the political equivalent of a Jedi mind trick. In reality, white power desperately needs people to not take to the streets again. That's what this is really about. It's about telling people, well, none of that stuff worked. It was politically counterproductive. Why? This is why the Republicans are we can't let that happen anymore. We can't let that happen again. That's what all of this is about. It's about convincing you to sit on your hands. It's as I've always told you, the white media is not in the business of entertainment. They're in the business of mind control. They're trying to carry out a mass mind control exercise right now with these tons of lies about the far left costing Democrats elections. This is demonstrably a lie. Now, another part of the problem that the white left corner of the white media's had is that a lot of those blue-haired kids on those college campuses oppose Israel's genocide, so we have the corporate mouthpieces like MSNBC who are attacking them for that because Israel is an outpost of American hegemony, and that's what the white media is the propaganda arm for. These people who you see on the white media, especially on cable TV, they're always bragging about how their little brats are in this or that university. But for them to see their own children protesting the very system that they depend on for every crumb of their daily bread, well, to those white media figures, this is literally an insurrection in their own homes. And they understand exactly what their job is under white supremacy. The white media employs them not for the sake of giving news, but for the sake of showing that they can corral people's minds and they can divert people in this or that direction that white power chooses. So when their own children become disobedient and begin railing against the very system that their parents depend on, as far as they're concerned, that is an existential crisis. What if the white power brokers who employ them find out about it? This is why trash like Eugene Daniels and the rest of the whores in the white media cozy up to these people, and it's so detestable. White supremacy's power does lie in its economy. But its enforcement power is through its domestic and foreign militaries. That is what the police are domestically and what the armed forces are outside the United States. The problem for these people is that for several years now you've had people inside the U.S. putting the enforcement arm of white supremacy under pressure at home and a major outpost under threat abroad. They don't want that to become habit forming. That's what all of this carpet bombing people with propaganda about these far leftists, they're costing Democrats the election. Why, they're no better than the orange man. No, they spend far more time telling Democrats you have to ignore these people here who are making demands. They never sit there and go over and over and over again just hammering that the Republicans have got to ignore the far right. Yeah, the people who stormed the Capitol and were literally smearing feces on the walls. You don't see any of these clowns on white cable getting too exercised about that. They don't sit there saying, oh, we got to bring these Republicans in and tell them you have to ignore your far right base. You just got to do it. They're costing you elections. They don't do that. Why? Because the right wing represents established power, established white power. And as for the so-called left, they represent controlled opposition. It reminds me of that movie Wag the Dog, where the political spinmeister played by Robert De Niro was asked whether their phony made-up war was about national security or political security, to which De Niro's character replied that for him, it was both. This is how the Democrats and the white media see the lies that they tell about the so-called far left costing the Democrats elections. And sure, they may be able to point to some obnoxious stuff that this or that person does, but you notice that whenever it comes time to talk about policy, they're not talking about people with blue hair or even transgenders. They start talking about anything having to do with money, reining in the police's thuggery, or stopping the United States from having its way internationally through its military. That's what they actually talk about when it comes time to talk about policy. That's the reason why I made it a point to show you that interview that Mehdi Hasan did with Jim Himes. When it came time for him to talk about the Democrats, the first words out of his mouth before he even thought to speak, we're still carrying the weight of defund the police. And even when Mehdi Hasan checked him on that and forced him to admit that that wasn't true, he was like, well, I'm just throwing that out there as an example. See, we're the ones that they've got front of mind. And the reason why is we're the ones demanding policy changes. All that other stuff that they may point to occasionally, sure, they'll give some minor lip service to this or that drag show and such. And while those are minor annoyances, that's all they are. They're talking about us because we're ultimately the ones that they need to point their guns at. This is about giving the Democrats cover to say, we can't listen to you people. You people are costing us elections. Yeah, and what about the Democrats ignoring their base? Well, we just have to be practical. We have to be practical. You have a bunch of Democrats saying that. Jim Clyburn said it, Jim Himes said it, and that woman Elise Slotnick up in New York said the exact same thing, talking about how we got to be practical. I'm trying to be pragmatic. These are the people who are only pragmatic and practical about how they're going to climb the political ladder and enrich themselves. And sure, these people know that what they're saying about the quote-unquote far left are a pack of lies, but they also know that they're shackled to this position. If they try to run away from it, well, they have to point at themselves and say, yeah, we've been the problem the whole time, and yeah, we've been lying through our teeth. That's something they're not going to do. They have to be shameless about these lies. Yes, it makes them look stupid and like they're liars when they get called on it, but this isn't about saving face. It's about preserving their system of white privilege. And yes, Mehdi Hasan did put Jim Himes on the spot and made the man admit that he was lying. But understand that for these people, their political calculus is, hey, that's just one guy on one internet stream. You see, Himes, like the rest of the Democrats, is banking on the fact that no one in the white broadcast media will do that to him. When he goes on TV in front of the cameras, where a lot more people are going to see him, none of the Joe Scarboroughs or the Rachel Maddows or the rest of these clowns are going to put him on the spot like that. Hell, most of the shills in these online outlets, they won't do it either. Do you think that if Jim Himes were to have talked to Roly-Poly Martin, that Roly would have called him out for lying about defunding the police and say, nobody said nothing about defund the police in 2024. I'm sorry, Congress, but that just ain't the case. I mean, I'm sorry, you're wrong. Do you think Roly-Poly would have done that? Of course not. Roly-Poly is desperate to get a job as a consultant for the DNC, so just like he was buck dancing for Hillary, he will eagerly kiss the rump of any Democrat that he can in the futile hopes that they'll put in a good word at DNC headquarters and he can finally get out of that broom closet he's been banished to ever since he was kicked out of CNN and out of the white media as a whole. Roly-Poly on his own little podcast, this fool's been spending years blaming the black grassroots, attacking the black grassroots, saying, y'all don't need to be listening to them young folks. You need to be mobilizing them older black voters. That's what he was saying years ago, so that failed. So that's what he's been doing. He's been doing the same thing that the Jim Himes and others do. They've been attacking the people who are actually the party's salvation, mainly because this is about browbeating us into literally settling for nothing. But it's also about focusing as many people's anger towards us as possible. to point at us and tell people these guys are the reason why the Democrats lost. No. What happened was we decided to stop saving the Democrats. And that's the reason why you see them lying and lying big. This is all about implanting a false memory of the past into the public mind. And the white media does that through relentless, hyper-aggressive repetition. You tell people a lie long enough and it becomes the truth, especially when nobody's allowed to challenge it. The people that the Katy turds are whining about are the ones who the Democrats put in power. Their problem is that these people are making demands that the party leadership doesn't want to do. The party isn't trying to carry out what's in the country's interest. They're not even trying to carry out what's in the Democratic Party's interest. They only concern themselves with what's in the interest of the party leadership. And in that respect, they're exactly like the Republicans and the white corporate power that the Republicans represent. They're all just like these corporations. They will strip mine the company until it's dead, all so they can give the money to a few corporate executives and a handful of the biggest shareholders at the top. So the same way we see corporations operating is the same way that we see the major parties operating. And just like the corporations will falsely blame government regulations, many of which the corporations literally wrote themselves, or they'll try to blame competition from Japan or China Inc., they'll always be blaming anyone and everyone but themselves, and the same thing goes for the Democrats. They're not going to take responsibility because this is not about being responsible. This is about trying to aggregate as much power and money for themselves by any means possible. And as a result, there will forever be a huge disconnect between the white media and the rank and file from the dominant society that they want to appeal to, because they will always speak for the white elite. In order to keep the rank and file on board, they throw in some anti-black rhetoric and tropes. And while feeding their would-be base audience scraps of red meat may be good enough to keep them pacified in the short term, at the end of the day, sooner or later, you're going to have to come up with some substantive differences. As Ron DeSantis is finding out in Florida, and as that other little redneck Jeff Landry is finding out in Louisiana, attacking black people full-time may give you your jollies, but even for your white voters, ultimately it doesn't pay the bills. The Democrats are pursuing a strategy of hoping that Donald Trump trips over his own shoelaces enough times that hopefully they can recreate 2018, where the midterms had the Democrats swept back into power as far as the U.S. House of Representatives went. That's what the Democrats are hoping for. But what they're also hoping is that just like in 2018, they won't have to offer, much less give the base anything. That's the point that they have to reach. They have to get back into power without actually doing anything for it. In fact, without even promising anything, because this is all about putting the genie of the demands that we made back into the bottle. The black grassroots showed that we could directly connect our demands to our ballot and make it where they were one and the same. So as far as the Democrats are concerned, they have to sever that connection. And they also have to make it where everybody else looks and goes, ooh, this is undesirable. We shouldn't be doing this. Well, you know what? We're not taking any sort of opinion poll as to what it is that we should do. Our political posture is going to be what is in our interest. And they can drag out all of the irrelevant cable news mouthpieces that they want to try to tell everybody that we're the problem. You know what? The real problem is we're not scared for them to do that. They want to say that we're the problem. Good, go ahead and say that. Focus all attention on us. Have everybody looking and going, man, those black, if you guys would just stop making demands, we won't. What we want is our own empowerment, and we could care less who that makes uncomfortable. These white media mouthpieces are actually helping our cause, and they don't even know it. But then again, we can add that to the mountain of things that these people don't know. Good day. And be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Jason Frazier, Barbara Bonsu, Jimmy Whitfield, DPB79, and Glenda Tice. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.